Any modern program or education on black history will always try to tell you that the black race was a race of savages or a race of slaves, but this is far from the truth. When we look back at history, especially throughout the period of the 1500s to the 1800s, we see kings, queens, lawyers, mathematicians, leaders of state. We see knights and saints. Slavery, as you know it, was a hoax, or what we call a psychological operation, because the black race was already in Europe, as we can see depicted in the art here, and we also know that the black race was already in America. All of the photos I am showing you are from European royalty. By understanding our true history, we can break the stereotypes that are cast out for us in society. Those who don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. For more information,
Shalom, shalom. It's your brother PJ the Saint. Alright, and we here coming back with another lesson. Today's lesson, we're going to be talking about King James, black royalty. Because a lot of people got history mixed up and they have this whitewashed perception of history. And the reason why is because a lot of things in history has been changed over time with meanings and definitions, and especially with the destruction of a lot of old monuments and statues and books. And they make it very, very hard to find this type of information, so it's not very available. You have to kind of look for it. You got to dig for it. It's not going to be something that's, there's more books with the false information than with the real information. The true information is in the older books and the older information. That's how you find this. But King James, he was not a white man. He was not white. He was black. The very dark-skinned man. He came from a long line of a black nobility line. That was the Stuart line that reigned for over 300 years. So this wasn't like this was just one black man that was a royal. No, he was from a long line of nobility, kings and queens. And this is something that they try to cover up or hide. And if you notice, and you really look into the lineage, the people that are in the royalty today, they are not actually related to King James or any of the nobility of the past. That's because they stole this. They weren't actually a blood descendant of anybody.
Egyptian kings, and they all fought the invading white races of Africa. So the Queen of England is not related to the black Egyptian kings as her fake genealogy chart claims, but she is in fact related to Alexander the Great, conqueror of Egypt. And she conveniently left him out of her genealogy chart and added in the black Egyptian rulers who consecutively ruled Egypt for 39,000 years. And I just want to point out that the queen's middle name is Alexandra, after Alexander the Great, her distant relative. So we see how this genealogy chart is false, because we know that she's not related to the native black rulers of Africa, but she is in fact related to the invader of the African lands. So this is the second genealogy chart, and in this one she claims that she is related to the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland. And as I've said before, if you look at the Fairbairn Book of Crests, you can clearly see that the rulers of Ireland and Scotland were all black, as well as Europe. They were all black. So we know that the Moors built everything in Europe, and they also ruled Rome. And this was long before the white popes of the Vatican. So another thing that I've explained in another video is Akhenaten's daughter was married to Tutankhamun, and when Tutankhamun was murdered by Horemheb, Akhenaten's daughter came to Scotland. She came to Scotland with an army, with, we don't know how many people, but she came there with many, many people from Egypt. And the name Scotland comes from the anglicized version of her name, and it translates to Scotia. So Scotia is where we get the later version of this as Scotland. So Scotia, or Scotland, was named after his daughter. And this all happened long before 700 AD, proving that black people from Egypt, from Akhenaten's bloodline, came to Scotland and other parts of Europe, long before the 700 AD timeline that we're given of the Moors coming into Europe. So the same black people who ruled Egypt during the Amarna dynasty came to Scotland and Ireland. So of course the Queen of England claims to be of the bloodline of the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland, because the kings and queens of Ireland and Scotland were Egyptians. So she has to say that she comes from the rulers of Egypt and the rulers of Ireland and Scotland, because these people were of the same bloodline. So the last fabrication that I want to show you about the Queen's genealogy is that according to her ancestors are the white Spaniards who invaded South America and later North America. And according to the Queen's genealogy, her Spaniard ancestors gave birth to a man named Charles, who ruled Rome and the Incan Empire of South America. They even produced a false image of Charles, whose real name is Carlos Quinto, and they show him as being a white man. But the real Carlos Quinto was black, and at this time the Moors ruled Spain and South America and Rome. So Carlos Quinto, a black man, a Moor, was the Holy Roman Emperor and the ruler of the Incan Empire of South America. And we can clearly see that the queens,
They are not actually related to King James or any of the nobility of the past. That's because they stole this. They weren't actually a blood descendant of anybody that was any nobility. But King James, he was the first king of England, and he was the 6th of Scotland. So he was actually a Scot. And just to touch on that a little bit, is a lot of the black Irish people were put into slavery. And a lot of people don't know that. And they were sent to slavery here on the east coast of America. You got North, South Carolina, Tennessee, Jamaica, and South America. So they sent different black Irish people all over, and there's different books about that type, and I'll touch on that later on in another video. But that's just a little nugget, that there was a black Irish slave trade, and that's where a lot of those people went. But a lot of people don't understand that the original people of Europe, the Pygmies, were a very dark-skinned people, that they were the very first people to settle into that land. They were what you call the Celts, and they were a very dark-skinned people. And the light-skinned people, who were the Slavs and the Turks, they didn't start to come in until later on after the fact. So all this architecture and all this history that you hear about and they attribute to white people, you got to keep in mind that in the actual history books, the scientists, and they've already did DNA evidence and all, and measured out the skulls and everything. They know these people are Negroid. But today's status quo would just tell you that, oh no, this is where white people came from. All black people come from Africa, because they want to push that out of Africa narrative. And that's not reality. But a lot of people don't understand that also, on top of the original people of Europe were dark skinned, you also had around the 700 CE, you had the Moors come into Europe, and they also took over Europe. So you have dark skinned people warring against dark skinned people taking over Europe, and they settled into Spain. And that's where you get into later on 1492 Colombo, who was a dark-skinned man, that he traveled to the Americas. That's where you get into that, because the Moors are the people who were sailors, and they already knew about America, because America is an old land. It was nothing new to them. It was just new to the lighter folk people. But to get back to King James, he was like I said, he was the king of a long line of Scottish kings, because he was a long line of the Stuart, and they had a very, very long line. And I'll put pictures of his siblings, his paternity line. And he comes from that Black Irish line. He had a Moorish line, and I'll put a couple pictures up. And the thing is about the pictures are they do something what we call is smudging, where they would go back on certain pictures that were painted. They would try to white them out, or they would try to take the darkness out of the hue of the take the hue out of the picture. Excuse me. So then we call this iconoclasms, and that's what that was. Or you call that the Renaissance, or when they had the Reconstruction age. When they talk about this period in history, that's what they're referring to. When a guy named Wesley Cornwell, and I do a build on him later, but he was one of the main people. His people went around destroying 97% of the black nobility architecture around Europe, and that was his job to destroy that. And the reason why is because around 1492, that's when you have so-called white people coming into power. You have Pope Alexander, you have the Borgias, you have these people coming up to power, and what was the biggest issue with that was you have these white people coming into power, and all the kings and queens and all the history before them was of a dark-skinned people. So they felt compelled to make the history, favor them, look like them. So that was the goal with the help of Wesley Cornwell. And through the help with the Moors, because the Moors were fighting against you gotta understand, the indigenous population of Europe. They told them about America, and so as the Moors, they had been trading with America. The black nobility population had already knew about America for a very long time. King James and Charles V, they actually come from, well, not King James, Charles V. He comes from an Inca bloodline, an Inca royal bloodline. So he actually had rulership in Europe and also in South America, and I'll touch on him on a later date. But this is just to touch on that there are plenty of dark-skinned people that were kings, queens, and nobility in all type of positions in Europe. And they just like to push that narrative that in this time, black people were only slave. And another biggest thing about King James is he was the person that translated the Bible into the language that we know today, which is English. And a lot of people, they like to put negative connotations and talk down on him because he did that. King James was a very wise man. He knew up to 40 different languages. So he was very wise, and he studied a lot. He was very well studied. And he also was a very good leader, a very good king. He didn't allow his people to he didn't want them to drink a lot. He didn't want them to eat bad things. He didn't want to eat pork. Like, if you looked at a lot of his rules and a lot of his decrees, he wanted them to worship. He had a day where they had to rest and worship. He believed in the Almighty. He believed in worshiping the Most High. And that's what the Roman Catholic Church, they really didn't like him, and they were fighting against him. He was one of the last black kings in Europe, and they were fighting against him to the end. And he was a Jacobite. He's part of the Jacobite nobility. And if you understand what Jacobite is, do you understand that he came from the Jacob line, and a lot of them knew this. And on the crest of his shield, he was, and if you well, let me go back. If you look at the name Great Britain, the name Great Britain means land of promise, land of covenant. And that comes from because in the Bible, Jacob was promised land. So it wasn't just one plot of land, it was multiple lands. And Europe was one of the lands that Jacob's seed line was promised. A lot of people don't know that. But to get back to King James, and just to give you another background on him, is that they also wield significant military power, and to neutralize the black influence in Scotland, the the neighboring whites that started to come into the place, the Slavics and all these people, they started to whitewash the line of the kings, and through intermarrying, saying and that's what really happened when you intermarry and mix. And you can look further down the line, you'll see that some of the kings and queens, they look mulatto or look mixed. They don't look all the way white, they don't look all the way black. And this is where you get that change in guard. And a lot of the people, and this is what I want to touch on, is at this time there was a lot of people going around being crypto Jews and crypto Muslims just to fit into certain societies, and that's what they were doing. They were intermarrying, and once they intermarried, they would intermarry into a royal bloodline. Then boom, their seed line's the king. Then they in the reign, and that's what a lot of people don't understand, how it changed so quickly. Because you gotta understand, King James reigned until the 1700s, almost 1800s. We still had black people in Europe that were ruling, and this information was prevalent when our great grandparents were alive, and they knew this. But around the 1900s, this is when they started to hide this information, because there were no more black kings and queens, and they just said you were slave. That's why that narrative is bad for us. But to get back on King James, he was the fourth. He was the fourth of Scotland. He was made to marry Margaret. He was the daughter of King Henry VII of England. In England, they were still under the Roman Catholic rulership. And, like I said, King James had his little beef with, the Roman Catholic Church. And see, that's the little games that they would play, is the Roman Catholic Church was getting these territories bit by bit, and they would get them to play on their side. And so as they would get them to play on their side, they would get the bordering country to try to parlay with the black nobility to try to get into the fold. That's what was happening. So when they would have a child, the child would be born and indoctrinated under the Roman Catholic rule, which was trying to push their like we try to call, like I said, 1492 Dom Diversus, which was put all Saracens, non-pagans, which means all people that were Hebrew, Islam, anybody like that had a divine faith. They was trying to change what they believed in. That's what the whole point of this time period was. It was a religious war. And like I said, there out of any of the black nobility, he probably has the most pictures that's prevalent to let you know, like, yeah, he's a brother. Out of all the other ones, you might find a few pictures. So he's one of the few that a lot of people like to talk about and like to use, and that's good for our people. We got to keep this type of information going, because a lot of people don't know. So to go back and to touch on what we were getting on. So like I said, King James was the first person to translate the Bible into what we have today, because half was written into Greek and the other half was in Hebrew. So he was the one who had 72 different translators, and he's the one that went around getting all this together and translated. And like I said, America is the old world, so a lot of the translations came from America. It came from stories that he got from the writings and teachings of America. That's why you have the Los Lunas stones. You have these different artifacts, the Back Creek stones, these different artifacts you find in America that are a lot older and predate things that they find in Africa and such and so on. But they don't try to put it out there because they just want to push it out of Africa. And you see why? Because this is the information that they're hiding, because they're hiding the true information. and it's all, you know, pushed behind the Roman Catholic Church. That's where it starts at. That's why a lot of people that push that entity or you know, help fund that entity, they don't know what they're doing. They're really funding basically that's Satan right there. So like I said, he if not one of the greatest monarchs that England ever seen, because his wisdom, his determination, and you know, he used to he warned the tribes of Scotland about things that the Roman Catholic Church was doing, and that's why they didn't like him. He was always keeping his people updated on things that was going on. He didn't hold his tongue. He was a good leader. So in 1603, he had like I said, he had all these different scholars and learned men, you know, help him put together what we call the King James Bible. And it was one of the greatest accomplishments that you know, the world has seen at that time, because it was written in Latin, Greek, French, you know, different translations that they had gotten. So it was just something that you never seen, that somebody would, you know, all this work that somebody was putting in. And he was also the king of France. A lot of people don't understand it was different regions. He was not just Great Britain, France, and Ireland. So it was, you know, he had different, and as the kingdom fell, which was the Stuart line, the kingdom got smaller and smaller, because, you know, they started to encroach upon their area. And like it was also mentioned that, you know, the Roman Catholic Church was so desperate, you know, because at first they didn't want to use the Bible, because like I said, the Apocrypha means hidden books. So a lot of those books tell the truth about the Roman Catholic Church and about so-called white people, and about a lot of things that's happened today in the world. And those are the books that they didn't want to be shown. So that's why you have the Bible written a certain way where it's confusing, because that was the Roman Catholic Church trying to hide what King James was trying to get to the people. And they tried to kill him multiple times. It was an attempt on his life by the Jesuit priest, and that's where you have the Jesuit order, and you have, you know, all these different secret groups and secret societies come up, because they needed to use these secret groups to infiltrate, because they couldn't just come up to him straight on. And if you understand history, you ever read about his son, King James, his nickname was Black Boy. And that was a thing that a lot of people didn't understand. If they show you a picture of King James' son, you would look at him, you'd be like, oh nah, this is this is a white dude. But nah, his nickname was Black Boy, Prince James. And a lot of people don't understand this information. And his wife was a dark-skinned woman, Elizabeth of Bohemia. And Charles Prince II, Prince of Wales, his nickname was Black Boy. He was a tall man, about 6 feet. And you know, he had a very dark hue. And a lot of people don't understand is, like, we get into the etymology of the name James. It is a Hebrew name. It comes from Jacob, or Jacob. You got to take the J out of it, but this is a Hebrew name. And when you get into the etymology of it, you understand. And a lot of people don't know that King James understood his bloodline. He understood his Hebrew tradition, and, you know, keeping the Most High, and keeping the Most High first, serving the people, never being a glutton, never, he was all about being a nobleman, all about being righteous, doing the right thing, following the law, making sure his people eat right, making sure his people don't fall into drugs, drinking, into folly, making sure they honor the Most High in creation. That's what he was about, and that's what they didn't like, because they were trying to usher in their new society. And if you look into him today, you know, they'll say that he's gay and all these different things, that he was a horrible man. And that's just their way of diminishing what he's did. I think I want to touch on a couple more things. before I close out. Bear with me. Oh, this is what I wanted to say. So, towards the end of his reign, which he wasn't the last king, I believe his son's daughter was. And what happened was there was a temp on his life and his son's life many times, because these people, they wanted to get rid of him. And as the attempts came on, they started to he died, then the Prince of Wales died, and his daughter was the last queen standing. And then what happened is they got to the point where they encroached them and they put them into slavery. And there's a book that basically details all this information, that the Stuart line was put into slavery and they were shipped to different spots in America with their names. And so, like, a lot of people, when we try to explain to them about genealogy and, hey man, you know your roots, know your roots. These people, there's information in log books of where they sent each family member and what their name was when they were shipped off to South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, New York, Jamaica, South America, Brazil. You get what I'm saying? So, like I try to tell people, and this is what I'm going to close out with, this is very important. It's very important for, especially, I know all people watching this, but for especially my people, dark-skinned people, Negro people that live in America, you need to do your genealogy, bro. Don't go with what people are telling you, because what they're telling you might not be your story. So, and I've been doing it myself, and it's a lot of things that you won't believe until you see it. Then when you see it, somebody could tell you whatever, but what's documented, and everything's documented because we have documentation going back through into the BC era. A lot of people don't. They like to shut that down, but there's documentation of crescent seals, coats of arms with black people on them, where these names come from. A lot of these names are black names. They're not slave names. Brown, Dunn, Dunnington, Covington. Like, all these names are black names for the most part. But this is a little series that I'm putting together, and this is just the first of the Stuart line and the black nobility and the black natives, the Douglas of Europe. And I'm going to be breaking down this history and a little bit of Aboriginal history, and just a little bit of America is the old world history, real history that needs to be pushed to people. So I want to say shalom and Kahala Yahweh, Bahashim Yahweh Shah, Yahweh Waha Ratazah, and peace and love.